The Supreme Court has backed away from decriminalizing homosexuality. What does the government intend to do about this? Joining us now, Union Finance Minister, Senior Congress Leader, Mr. Chidambaram. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking to Headlines. This is an issue that's attracted a lot of interest across the country. What does your government intend to do about the Supreme Court verdict? Do you believe it's a retrograde decision?
Well, I think it's a wrong decision. I was very saddened by the decision. It requires to be reconsidered by the Supreme Court, and I think there are ways in which we can get the Supreme Court to reconsider it. Failing that, there is always a legislative option of amending Section 377. It is a slow process. It is a more difficult process given the configuration in Parliament and given the disorder in Parliament. I think we should try non-legislative option, failing which we should make it clear we will go through the legislative option.
Do you think that a legislation decriminalizing homosexuality in Indian Parliament will ever be able to get a majority given the social moods and the traditional values that people believe they have?
I think so. I think if it comes to a vote in Parliament, we will be able to carry the vote, even in this Lok Sabha. I think so.
BJP is being very ambivalent. Narendra Modi hasn't spoken. They're challenging you to call an all-party meeting. I was in Central Hall before coming here, and one of the senior-most BJP leaders said, you had 10 years to bring about a legislation. Why didn't you?
There was no need for legislation. 5 or 6 years ago, the High Court read down Section 377. And when an appeal was filed by the private party, government's position was, we will not file an appeal. We support the judgment of the High Court. If the Supreme Court had upheld the High Court judgment, there would be no need for legislation. Reading down sections is a well-accepted rule of interpretation, a well-accepted and well-known, well-settled rule of interpretation. In any event, until the Supreme Court decision came, there was no question of contemplating legislation either.
Do you believe it is important for Narendra Modi, the BJP's prime ministerial candidate, to voice his opinion on this burning issue? A lot of the members of the gay and lesbian community are saying, we want to know what Modi thinks.
I want to know what the BJP thinks. When the Congress president spoke early today, she was speaking not only as an individual, she spoke as the Congress president. So I think the BJP should speak for the party. What does the party stand on this? Incidentally, I would like to know what Mr. Modi's stand on this is.
Because the BJP leaders privately say that the Congress is disconnected from the mass opinion of the country, that this is a very minority-based opinion. Very few people actually believe this is a very liberal Western thought. In India, homosexuality is bad. That's what the BJP leaders are privately saying.
This is why we say this kind of majoritarian attitude will destroy the very idea of India. The minorities have rights. The LBGT or LGBT community is not a minuscule fraction, as the Supreme Court said. One estimate places it at over 100 million people in India. But even if it is 100 people, they have rights. Every individual is entitled to his or her constitutional rights being protected. The Supreme Court must stand up for an individual's fundamental and constitutional rights.
In its judgment, the Supreme Court says that Western laws cannot be imported into India, almost suggesting that this is not an Indian concept, that we're trying to blindly ape the West.
This is not a Western law. 1860 law, Indian Penal Code, made by Macaulay, should be described as the Western law. He was imposing the social and moral standards of Britain and what he thought were the social and moral standards of India upon the Indian people. But we are not in 1860 anymore. In 1860, what was our understanding and knowledge of human physiology, human psychology, human genetics? Today, science has opened our eyes. We know more about human physiology, human psychology, human genetics. LGBT have rights. If that is their sexual orientation, that's the way they are.
What do you wish to tell all those members of this community who came out of the closet after 2009 when the High Court gave them some space to breathe? Now they're very concerned, and you've been Home Minister in the past. You know how the police operates. They're very worried about the draconian law and being persecuted once more.
Well, I think they should shed their fear. Now that they have shed their fear, we don't go back to living in a cocoon of fear. Have to stand up and say, this is what we are, and we are entitled to be what we are. And as citizens of this country, we are entitled to protection for what we are. I would think that the Home Minister and the Ministry of Home Affairs will address this issue and consider, if necessary, an advisory to the states that this law cannot be applied either overtly or covertly in a manner that instills fear in people. That the law must recognize that it is being debated. The law enforcer must recognize that the law is being debated, and therefore must approach the LGBT community with a great degree of sensitivity.
Paragraph 23 of the judgment says that the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Health Ministry were never on the same page. The Ministry of Home Affairs was against decriminalizing homosexuality, whereas the Health Ministry said, because of advice from NACO, that sex between men, sex amongst women, has the potential to spread AIDS, and therefore it should be decriminalized. Isn't that a factual position, that your two key ministries were not on the same page on this issue?
That was when the matter was being heard in the High Court. As the ministry in charge of the IPC, the ministry simply placed its defense of the section. The Ministry of Health pointed out the consequences of applying the section in a say, heavy-handed manner. But once the High Court read down the section and decriminalized consensual sex among consenting adults, the government in the cabinet took the decision on the advice of the GUM that we will not appeal against the judgment, but we will accept the judgment. And we will instruct the Attorney General to appear before the Supreme Court and offer to assist the Supreme Court in looking into the matter, but make it very clear that we will not appeal against the judgment. In the Supreme Court, there were no two voices. The government spoke in one voice.
Final question, sir. Will you consider bringing an ordinance if you're not able to get political consensus on this issue?
An ordinance also has to be replaced by a law within 6 weeks of the reassembly of Parliament. I'm sure that option will be considered. When I said the legislative option remains, that includes ordinance as well as in moving a bill. The legislative option remains, but I think we should try for the non-legislative option of a review or a curative petition, ask the Supreme Court to reconsider the matter by constituting a larger bench. If that option fails, or that option is not successful for one reason or another, we should consider the legislative option.
But given how little time is left and given the position the Supreme Court has already taken, do you think a curative petition before the Supreme Court will serve the intended purpose, sir?
Why? You can move for a curative petition and ask for a stay of this judgment. You can ask for the stay of the Supreme Court judgment. It can be kept in abeyance until the larger bench hears the matter.
Some of the MPs in Parliament were saying that a deeply unpopular government is now trying to catch on to some straw so that it seems populist or it seems to be in sync with the mood on the street. Is that why we're seeing so many senior Congress leaders come out and voice this? How do you respond to those MPs suggesting that there is politics in the position that Mr. Chidambaram and Sonia Gandhi have taken today?
I chaired the GUM, and I and my colleagues in the GUM recommended that we accept the High Court judgment. See, until the High Court went into the matter at great length, yes, there were many, many views in the country, and that is how it will be. In the US, in UK, same-sex marriages are being debated, live-in relationships are being debated. When the debate is on, there will be many views. But once the High Court gave a judgment, and then the Cabinet asked 3 or 4 ministers to sit together, we came out with a clear recommendation, and that's on the record, that we should not appeal against the judgment, we should accept a judgment, and tell the Supreme Court that this is a progressive interpretation of Section 377.
But what do you do with people like Ramdev who say, send gays and lesbians to me, I'll cure them through yoga? There's a lot of people who think like that, Mr. Chidambaram.
Well, a lot of people think like that is irrelevant. A lot of people think like that is made public is what is relevant. I think you should ignore these unscientific, retrograde, regressive views. I mean, how can you cure, quote unquote, cure a sexual orientation? That is in his genes. That is in his the physiology of the person, isn't it? And if people want to close their eyes to science and knowledge, I can only be sorry for them. But these are the outliers. The broad masses of the people, the majority of the people understand, even in rural India, they understand that sexual orientations can differ from person to person. Are you saying that people in the villages don't know or don't acknowledge or don't know of people who are gay? Of course they do. I mean, how can we take such a patronizing attitude to people in rural India? Of course they understand all these things.
So what you're saying is very significant. There are millions of people who will draw comfort. And I hope that you act on that advisory which you're saying the government should put out.
Well, that is only my thinking at the moment. I have not spoken to the Home Minister, but I think that's a possible way to allay the apprehensions of the LGBT community until the matter is resolved.
Because members from the community have been harassed in the past. That possibility exists. I think they'll draw comfort from your statements.
No one should harass anyone. We must recognize that science is discovering more and more facts, more and more things about ourselves. How much does man or woman know about the man or the woman? Science opens our eyes. Science helps us discover what we are. And I think it'll be such a terrible shame if we ignore all that science has helped us understand and live in a time warp of 1860. If there is any Western colonial law, it is the 1860 law.
But the judges say it's your responsibility. You have to legislate.
Of course it is our responsibility. But judges in this country have acknowledged and legitimized live-in relationships. Judges in this country have recognized that a child born out of wedlock would still be a legitimate child and entitled to legal rights. How do judges say that? A High Court has adopted well-settled principle of interpretation, namely reading down a section. And what did Justice Shah do? Justice Shah read down the section in a limited way. He said, among consenting adults in private, an act which is described as against the order of nature is not criminal. That's all he said. And why should it be now made criminal once again? Once it is decriminalized, it should be allowed to rest there.
Well, you've said things which people will draw comfort from. Let's see how we're able to act on this.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chidambaram, for your
Welcome.
time. Thank you so much. Thank you.